In today's video, we're going to be discussing the rarest titles in the history of World of Warcraft that were obtainable for a short time by events or achievements. And in the number 10 spot, we have the Champion of the Naaru from the Grand Crusader expansion. This title was awarded to players who completed the Attunement questline for the Serpent Shrine Cavern, which involved a very lengthy quest to summon Nightbane and Karazhan. The player also had to defeat Gruul and Magtheridon before patch 3.02 when it was removed following the Wrath of the Lich King expansion. Players who managed to obtain this title before patch 3.02 were awarded a Feat of Strength achievement. However, it was still possible to obtain this title even after the patch if the player had the questline in their quest log and hadn't abandoned it, making it technically obtainable even after patch 3.02, but not by traditional means, as the Attunement questlines were all removed. Less than 7% of the player base even managed to complete this quest chain and were awarded the title at all. And at number 9, we have the Hand of Adal, also from the Grand Crusader expansion. To get this title, the player had to complete a quest called the Vials of Eternity from Sora in the Caverns of Time. It required the player to obtain a remnant from both Lady Vash in Coilframe Reservoir, and a remnant from Kel'Thas Sunstrider in Tempest Keep. After completing this quest and turning it back into Sora, the players needed to complete a long quest chain, starting with the quest Tablets of Bari, which required the player to go to Shadowmoon Valley and collect 12 Bari tablet fragments, up to the final quest in the chain called Akama's Promise, which required the player to bring the Medallion of Karabar to Adal and Shatrath. Upon completion, the player would be able to talk to an NPC who resides in a cage behind Fathom Lord Karathras in the Serpent Shrine Cavern. After killing Fathom Lord, the NPC locked behind him would be freed, and the player can then pick up a quest which will make them return to Akama and tell him what happened. When the player reaches Akama, they can notice that he's having a conversation with Illidan's presence. In this, Illidan orders Akama to have one of the Ashtongue venture into Tempest Keep to kill Alar, but Akama pushes this onto the player instead. After some very long quest chains, the final quest is called a Distraction for Akama, which the player would then help Akama and Maiev enter the Black Temple. Turning in this quest, the player was awarded both the title Hand of Adal and a unique item called Medallion of Karabar, which would be upgraded to the Blessed Medallion of Karabar upon killing Illidan at the top of the Black Temple. This necklace can also be used to teleport the player to the entrance of the Black Temple. Only 7% of players managed to complete this achievement as well, probably because of how long it was with the little rewards along the way, making players feel like it was just another quest chain and not really worth doing. And at number 8, we have the Undying and the Immortal title. These titles were given to players who earned the Undying and the Immortal achievements, which required a raid group to defeat every boss within Wrath of the Lich King's Naxxramas without allowing any raid member to die, during the boss encounters in 10-man for Undying and 25-man for Immortal. Naxxramas was known for having very difficult boss fights in its vanilla iteration, while Wrath of the Lich King's fights were admittedly toned down. Death Knights even had a talent called Shadow of Death to keep fighting as a ghoul after their health reached 0. This would not count as a death and would allow the Death Knight to keep fighting, allowing them to get the achievement just as long as the boss fight died before the ghoul ran out, as Death Knights only counted against the achievement if they died during a boss fight. So DKs could cheese this achievement a little bit. This ability had too many technical problems and was way too strong for Blizzard to fix, and they ended up just removing the talent altogether. There was also the problem with the random DCs causing a loss of the achievement, which is a big reason why they stopped adding achievements like this after Wrath of the Lich King, because that's something that's kind of out of your control and doesn't account for skill. If you wiped at the first boss and you weren't saved to the raid, it was also possible to leave Naxxramas and form another raid group with someone else being the leader instead. This was eventually fixed in 4.03 when Blizzard just removed the achievement from the game. Only 6% of the players managed to obtain this achievement, which is quite funny seeing how many Wrath of the Lich King's veterans want to claim that Naxxramas was not challenging at all. And at number 7, we have the titles awarded from the Gladiator Sanctum building in Warlords of Draenor. This building awarded numerous titles, such as Lady of War / Lord of War, which would be granted after the player completed the Last of Us achievement. This required the player to have a level 3 version of the Gladiator's building, and once built, they could then queue for a unique instance in the Highmaul Coliseum. This being a free-for-all arena where many players would all get shoved into a pit together to fight to the death, until only one player survived. They would then be granted this title based on the gender of the player's character, as well as a toy. Other unique titles for the Gladiator's buildings included the PvP ones, which were given by a quest in the Gladiator's building to kill 500 players of each opposing race in Warlords of Draenor zones, with the quest being handed out to massacre one race at a time. For example, the player may get a quest to kill 500 Tauren in Warlords of Draenor areas, If the player did this, they'd be granted the Butcher title. If they got the quest to kill 500 Night Elves and did this too, they'd be granted the Scourge of the Kaldari title, and so on and so on. So, to get the Warlord of the Draenor title, it required the player to kill 500 of every single opposing faction's race for a total of 3,500 kills. Sadly though, you could only ever have one quest at a time, meaning you usually killed far more than 3,500. There was, however, a quick way to farm these out. If you went to the group finder page and searched for Nemesis Farm and group with 5 other players, whenever someone in the group would get a kill on a Blood Elf, everyone in the group would be granted 5 credits each, instead of just 1. You did need to all be on the same Nemesis quest though, and it would not work if only some people had the quest to kill Blood Elves and the other people had the quest to kill Undead, for example. This made it very popular to farm it out very quickly, seeing as finding 500 Pandaren players was a feat in of itself. These titles have less than 2% of the player base owning them, making them extremely rare. While this title is still in the game, it has become nearly impossible to achieve. First off, because Ashran is mostly ignored now, unlike back in WoD when it was current content. In fact, it was even removed from the game for some time. It really only being active during weekly PvP Brawl Classic Ashran, and of course being one of the options from the Epic Battleground queue. There is also a total of 13 races in WoW, with Pandaren being available to both factions, leading to 7 per faction. However, with BFA we were introduced to allied races, totaling at 10 allied races, 5 per faction. They make up almost half of the total race count, and these allied races not counting for any of the Nemesis quests. They drastically lower the amount of the original races, especially with the immense popularity of some of the allied races like Void Elves and Zandalari, which just makes trying to get this title even harder today. And at number 6, we have the Conqueror of Ulduar title. Similar to the Undying title in Naxxramas, Conqueror of Ulduar was awarded to players who obtained the achievement Conqueror of Ulduar, which required the raid to defeat each boss in Ulduar in 25 player mode, without allowing any raid member to die to a boss during any point of the raid lockout period. All bosses had to be pulled and killed within 1 attempt. Less than 1% of the player base owns this title, and it was permanently removed from the game following the Shattered Cataclysm. And at number 5, we have Of the Black Harvest. This is a unique title as it was given to only Warlock players who got the achievement Breaker of the Black Harvest, which required them to defeat Canrathon Ebonlock on top of Black Temple in a unique solo instance dungeon before Warlord of Draenor launch. To start this quest, players could obtain an item called the Sealed Tome of the Lost Legion, which had an extremely rare chance to drop from random rare mobs around the Isle of Thunder. It wasn't bind on pickup however, and could be sold in the auction house if another player didn't want it for themselves. After the entire questline was completed, the Warlock would gain a passive called the Codex of Xerath, which imbue their spells with raw felt power, turning all their fire spells and even some shadow spells green instead of their normal colors, although far less visible these days with most of the spells gone or changed since then. A unique fact about this book is upon a rare dying, it would check if a Warlock took part in the kill, and if they did, it would then roll to see if the book dropped, and if it did drop, it would then randomly assign it to a random Warlock who helped killing the rare, meaning only one Warlock could ever get the book from a rare kill. This was confirmed by a Game Master after the community asked more about it, making some players just naturally unlucky as they were never chosen to get the drop and were forced to buy it off the auction house for thousands of gold instead. Less than 1% of Warlock players managed to obtain the title and get the green fire, as in addition to its rarity, it was also a difficult challenge like the Mage Tower. And at number 4, we have the Scarab Lord title. If you played Classic servers recently, you probably know this title all too well. For those of you who may not know, a Scarab Lord means the player was one of the players on their server to ring the gong to open the gates of Ahn'Qiraj, allowing the entire server to enter and do the raid. The quest chain to do this was one of the longest in the game to this date, and required an entire guild of people who were constantly supporting one chosen player the entire way. Along with the unique title came the Black Karaji Resonating Crystal, which was the only Silithid mount in the game up to Cataclysm that could be used in the open world, and the only obtainable legendary mount ever. The other bug mounts, like the Blue Karaji Resonating Crystal, could only be used inside the Ahn'Qiraj raid and not anywhere outside of it. To get this title, the player had to do a quest called What Tomorrow Brings, which required them to venture to the caverns in time in Tanaris and find Anachronos. Anachronos would then send the player to Blackwing Lair in order to obtain the head of the Broodlord Lash Slayer. Then the real grind begins. Thousands of Silithid carapace fragments, world boss fights, multiple raids completed, thousands of ingredients given to quest collectors, hundreds of hours of grinding with a final, massive, server-wide event called the 10-Hour War, which lasted 10 hours. that was so large it often lagged out the entire server, and the title, mount, and fame are all now yours forever. With a new updated version of the mount even being added in the BFA pre-patch, they never did an event like this again because of all the server problems it caused. And there's a reason classic players wanted a fresh version of vanilla for so long. And at number 3, we have the title Death's Demise. This title required players to earn the achievement Realm First Death's Demise, which could only be obtained by the first raid group on the entire server who killed Yogg-Saron without any assistance from the Keepers in 25-player version of Ulduar. You see, when the raid killed some of the bosses in Ulduar, they would break out of their mind control and come to their senses. They would then give passive buffs to the raid during the fight against Yogg-Saron. It was optional to speak to these Keepers and request they offer you assistance in the fight against Yogg, so if you went straight to Yogg-Saron without requesting their help, you would activate the hard mode. This was a feat that was extremely difficult to do, seeing as even groups in full Ice Crown Citadel gear would be demolished without any assistance from the Keepers, all while the DPS checks were much more difficult to achieve. This is because the buffs the Keepers gave were 10% increase to damage, stacking 4 times, along with other minor buffs like 20% movement speed, 20% healing increase, 20% reduced damage taken, and 20% more maximum health. Yogg-Saron without any Keeper assistance was widely regarded as the most difficult encounter in the game at the time, and anyone who managed to achieve this earned serious bragging rights, as less than a single percent of the player base has this title. And for the second spot, we have the Celestial Defender title. Similar to the previous one, this one was awarded in Ulduar for the Realm First killing of Algoan the Observer in 25-player mode. Unlike Yogg-Saron without any Keeper assistance, Algoan was a hidden boss in Ulduar that was considered by the community to be the hardest boss in the entire game. In fact, this boss was so difficult that Blizzard even added a description for him that reads, "He feeds on your tears," along with an achievement by the same name. Although its difficulty was greatly exaggerated, as part of the reason it was so difficult was the fact that you only got to fight Algoan for 1 hour at a time each lockout. In addition, Algoan just did tremendous amounts of damage and required healers and tanks to be on their feet at all times throughout his fight. His Quantum Strike ability would hit multiple times for 18,000 damage on 10-man, 35,000 damage on 25-man, which was about 70% of the average player's HP at the time, each along with having an absurdly fast attack speed. Tanks had to watch out for his Phase Punch ability, which, when attacked by a tank, would cause the tank to phase out. Once the stacks reached 5, Algoan would ignore the tank for 10 seconds, causing him to run around the raid and one-shot anyone who he had aggro on if the off-tank couldn't grab him in time. Along with having many other overtuned abilities, Algoan was the hard mode of Ulduar, and was only able to be killed by those who were the most dedicated at raiding, with less than 1% of the player base owning this title. Also, for more info on what hard mode means and info about Algoan, check out the History of Hard Modes video. And finally, at the number 1 spot on this list, we have the Grand Crusader title. This title was only awarded to a raid group who completed Realm First Grand Crusader achievement, which required the group to complete the heroic version of the Trial of the Grand Crusader raid with 50 attempts remaining in 25-player mode. The reason this is the rarest title in the history of the game is for many reasons, such as Wrath of the Lich King's infamous transfer aborted instance not found bug that plagued dungeons and raids. On top of requiring the raid to play at peak performance the entire time, not a single person in the raid could die, seeing as the raid started with 50 attempts remaining. And since this was a Realm First accomplishment, a single person dying could permanently ruin your chances at ever obtaining this achievement and the title. So it's kind of like a combination of the Immortal title and the Realm First achievement, which made it super extra spicy to obtain. This achievement is so rare that it's listed as 0% of the player base having it, making it the most unobtained title in the game.